They said no one would ever return to Hope Creek. The winters were merciless, the mountains unforgiving, and the ghosts far too loud. But Emma Collins did 8 months pregnant, heartbroken, and with only her loyal shepherd Max beside her. Most people saw a frozen ruin swallowed by time. Emma saw a chance, a promise buried under ice, waiting for someone brave enough to listen. Because sometimes redemption hides in the coldest places. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from and subscribe if you believe in faith, loyalty, and miracles born in snow. Snow fell in relentless waves across the jagged ridges of Hope Creek, Colorado, the wind howling like something ancient and angry that refused to die. Emma Collins gripped the steering wheel of her rusting gray SUV, its heater long since surrendered to the cold. Her breath came out in thin clouds as she peered through the half-frozen windshield, the wipers groaning with each desperate swing. 8 months pregnant, her movements were slow and deliberate, every bump on the icy mountain road a reminder of the fragile life turning quietly inside her. Emma was 30, with long auburn hair tied in a loose braid beneath her wool hat, strands escaping to cling to her pale cheeks. Her eyes gray-blue like the sky before a storm carried the weary calm of someone who had learned that survival was less about strength and more about endurance. She had been a teacher once, good with children, gentle with words. But after her husband Daniel was killed in a roadside accident a year ago, the light in her voice had dimmed. The city had offered condolences and whispers, her family offered pities that felt more like blame. So when the letter arrived about a cabin for sale in Hope Creek, she hadn't seen a ruin, she'd seen an ending. Or maybe if she was honest with herself, a beginning she didn't yet understand. In the passenger seat, Max shifted restlessly. He was a 5-year-old German shepherd with a thick sable coat, intelligent amber eyes, and a posture that never fully relaxed. His left ear bore a faint scar from his years as a police K-9 before being retired early after a field injury. Despite the faint limp in his hind leg, Max still carried himself with quiet authority. He had been Daniel's dog once, and after Daniel's death, he had become Emma's last tether to a life that had vanished. She often wondered if Max sensed the same emptiness she did, or if he simply stayed out of loyalty, a word that still made her chest ache. The storm intensified, swallowing the road ahead in white haze. Emma leaned forward, squinting at the dim glow of her headlights. "Just a little further, Max," she murmured, her voice trembling from cold and exhaustion. The engine sputtered, coughed twice, then died with a final shudder. Panic gripped her as silence rushed in, heavy and absolute. She turned the key again. Nothing. The fuel gauge trembled near empty. For a long moment, Emma just sat there, the wind rattling the car doors like impatient fists. She could feel the baby moving beneath her ribs, slow but strong. "I know," she whispered, pressing her gloved hand to her belly. "We can't stay here." She stepped out into the storm snow, immediately soaking into her boots, the cold biting through her jeans. Max followed, pressing close against her legs, his breath forming short clouds. The world beyond the headlights was a swirl of white. She pulled her coat tighter and started walking uphill, guided by instinct and a faint outline ahead, a shadow against the storm. Each step was an act of defiance, the wind clawing at her, threatening to push her back down the mountain. Her legs burned, her lungs stung, but she kept going, one hand on her belly, the other gripping the leash. After what felt like hours, she saw a cabin half buried under snow. Its wooden porch sagged, its windows shuttered, but the faint shape of a chimney stood like a promise. Emma's heart pounded with desperate relief. "Come on, Max," she said hoarsely. The door was locked, but the wood was brittle with age. One shove from her shoulder and it gave way with a crack that echoed like a gunshot. Inside, the air was stale but still warmer than the storm outside. Dust motes drifted in the dim light from her flashlight. The walls were lined with old mining tools and rusted lanterns. An abandoned fireplace sat at the center, still holding the blackened memory of old fires. Emma collapsed against the nearest wall, trembling from exhaustion. Max shook off the snow, then began pacing, sniffing the corners, alert as always. She found a blanket stuffed in an old chest and spread it across the floor, curling onto it as Max lay beside her, his head resting protectively near her stomach. For the first time in months, she let her guard down. Her fingers trembled as she reached out to stroke Max's fur. "We made it," she murmured, though she wasn't sure she believed it. Her flashlight beam fell on a faded calendar pinned crookedly to the wall. The last date marked was June 1953, circled in red. She frowned. Hope Creek, she remembered reading, had been a mining town abandoned after a sudden government shutdown no one had ever explained. There had been whispers of contamination, radiation, even a cover-up. But all that mattered now was warmth, safety, and the so steady rhythm of her child's heartbeat beneath her hand. Outside, the wind howled across the mountains, carrying the sound of something metallic clanging faintly in the distance. Max's ears twitched. He lifted his head, a low growl vibrating in his chest. Emma froze, her breath catching. The sound came again, faint but distinct, like footsteps crunching over snow. She switched off the flashlight and listened to her heart hammering. For a long minute, there was only silence. Then, as if on cue, the storm roared louder, drowning out everything else. Emma exhaled shakily, resting her head back against the wall. Just the wind, she whispered to herself, though she wasn't sure. Max stayed awake long after she drifted into uneasy sleep, his eyes fixed on the window, where beyond the frost someone might have been watching. Morning broke pale and cold, the kind of winter light that turns everything silver and silent. Emma stirred under her blanket, the ache in her back reminding her of both the pregnancy and the hard wooden floor beneath her. The fireplace was cold again. Her breath fogged the air as she sat up. Max was already awake, pacing near a loose floorboard, his tail low and ears twitching. He'd been restless since dawn, pawing at the same spot, whining softly as if something beneath the cabin had caught his attention. "What is it, boy?" Emma murmured, rubbing her swollen belly before shuffling toward him. When she knelt, she noticed a faint draft seeping through the crack in the wall behind the board. She pried at the wood gently with a rusted poker from the fireplace until a small section gave way. Behind it, wedged between the beams, was an old dust-covered envelope, sealed in wax, that had long since cracked. The paper was yellowed, brittle, and smelled faintly of earth and smoke. Emma's fingers trembled as she unfolded it. The handwriting was elegant, looped, the ink faded, but still legible. "To whomever finds this," it began, "forgive us. The truth is buried here beneath the old church of Hope Creek, sealed by the same hands that took our faith. The government called it a containment. We called it a sacrifice. The vault holds the payment, blood money for silence. May God forgive what we did to buy our peace." Emma read the words twice, her pulse quickening. The date at the bottom, June 18th, 1953, matched the circled day on the old calendar she had seen the night before. Her heart thudded painfully. She leaned back against the wall, feeling the weight of the letter like a stone in her chest. Hope Creek hadn't just been abandoned. It had been erased. She'd studied cases like this before. She used to volunteer at the Historical Preservation Society, cataloging forgotten mining towns. But none of those histories had ever been personal breathing close enough to touch. "A vault beneath the church," she whispered. "What happened here?" Max pressed his nose against her hand, sensing her unease. She stroked his fur absently, feeling his warmth seep into her chilled fingers. "It's okay, boy. We're just uncovering old ghosts." Later that afternoon, Emma ventured outside. The storm had quieted, leaving behind a glassy stillness. The snow sparkled in the sunlight, untouched except for her own footprints from the night before. She could see the faint outline of a church steeple in the distance, half buried under ice, and the roof line of what might have once been a town square. She felt a strange pull in her chest, a mix of curiosity and fear, the same instinct that had led her to study ruins and forgotten places in college. She trudged through the knee-deep snow, Max bounding ahead, his paws leaving clean tracks in the powder. The town was eerily preserved under its shroud of frost. A row of storefronts leaned into the wind, their painted signs barely visible through the ice. One read Hope Creek General Supply, another post office. The church stood at the far end of Main Street, its bell tower cracked and crooked, but still standing like a sentinel over the dead town. Emma stopped to catch her breath, one hand on her belly. She could feel the baby kick faintly, as if reminding her she wasn't alone. "We'll just look," she whispered. "No digging. Not yet." Inside the church, the air was still and dry, scented faintly of cedar and dust. Sunlight filtered through broken stained glass windows, painting fractured rainbows across the pews. The altar was covered in frost. Emma moved slowly, her boots echoing on the wooden floor. Behind the pulpit, a section of the floor looked newer, less worn. She knelt, brushing snow from the seams. "The vault," she murmured. But before she could investigate further, Max stiffened, a deep growl rumbling from his chest. His fur bristled as he stared toward the open doorway. Emma froze. Outside, through the shifting snowlight, she saw something flicker, a glint quick and sharp, like the reflection of glass or metal. She held her breath listening. The wind had picked up again, carrying with it a distant, rhythmic sound, crunching footsteps on snow. "Hello?" she called, her voice trembling more than she meant it to. No answer. Max barked sharply, the sound echoing off the church walls. The footsteps stopped. Silence returned, heavy and complete. She waited several minutes before daring to move. "It's just the wind," she whispered, though she didn't believe it. They made their way back to the cabin as the light faded into the dim blue of evening. Once inside, Emma barred the door with a piece of broken furniture. Her hands shook as she poured herself a cup of tea from her thermos, though the liquid had gone cold. She spread the letter on the table again, tracing its words with a trembling finger. A vault. Government money. Forgiveness. It didn't make sense, none of it did. But she couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something didn't want her there. Max lay near the window, his gaze fixed on the forest beyond. His ears flicked with every gust of wind. Emma gathered her notebook from her bag and began to jot down everything she had found: the calendar, the letter, the coordinates from the church's map that she'd memorized before leaving. Her training had taught her that preservation meant documenting the truth no matter how dark it was. But this time it wasn't just history, it was survival. Outside, as night consumed the valley, a faint light blinked again between the trees, steady this time, deliberate. Max growled low, his body tense. Emma stood by the window, clutching her belly, eyes wide with dread. "We're not alone, Max," she whispered, and for the first time since arriving in Hope Creek, she began to wonder if she and her loyal companion had just uncovered something meant to stay buried forever. Ranger sniffed his way around the room, tail wagging with quiet confidence. He checked each corner methodically, his claws clicking lightly on the wood. He stopped near the hearth and sat down, ears alert but not tense, his silent approval. Emily exhaled, tension easing from her shoulders. She removed her coat and hung it by the door, her movements tentative, reverent. On the dining table lay an envelope sealed with dark green wax, impressed with the Blackwood family crest, a tree whose roots spiraled into an infinity knot. Her grandmother's handwriting curled across the front for Emily. Her hands trembled as she broke the seal. The letter inside was written in firm, graceful strokes. "My dearest Emily," it began, "if you are reading this, then you have found your way home. I know you do not yet understand why I left you this place when others received more obvious fortunes, but this cabin is the heart of our legacy. You are its keeper now." Emily read on, her throat tightening. Evelyn wrote of 200 acres of protected land, of 3 springs hidden across the forest north, for healing, south for clarity, and east for peace. "Do not be afraid of what you cannot explain." The letter continued. "The land answers to kindness and respect. The pantry will never empty if gratitude fills the hands that take from it. The cabin breathes as all living things do. Listen to it." Her grandmother's final line struck deep. "The world will tell you that your worth lies in what you own. But this place will teach you that your true inheritance is not wealth, it is belonging. You were chosen long before you knew why." Emily lowered the letter, her vision blurred by tears. She hadn't realized she was crying. The firelight flickered across her face, highlighting the quiet defiance in her eyes, the same look Evelyn once had when she stood her ground in family disputes. Ranger approached, resting his head on her knee. She stroked his fur absently, whispering, "She knew I'd come." As the storm howled outside, Emily explored the cabin's rooms. Each space felt lived in, but untouched by time: a small bedroom with a handmade quilt, a shelf filled with leather-bound books, and a cradle carved from cherry wood. The cradle, smoothed by countless generations, seemed to hum faintly under her fingertips. On the wall hung an old photograph, Evelyn in her youth, standing before the same cabin, snow swirling around her. By the time Emily returned to the main room, the storm had begun to wane. She curled into the rocking chair with the letter in her lap, Ranger lying beside the hearth. For the first time since Evelyn's funeral, she felt something close to peace. She no longer saw herself as the poor granddaughter who received the least. In this quiet, breathing cabin, surrounded by warmth and shadow, she began to sense that her grandmother's gift was not a burden, but a calling. As the last wind faded beyond the trees, Emily whispered into the fire, "I'll take care of it. I promise." Ranger's ears twitched and the fire seemed to glow a little brighter, as though the cabin had heard her. The wind had softened by dawn, but the cold bit sharper, the kind that crawled into bone and stayed there. Emma trudged through the forest trail she had marked the day before, her boots crunching over frozen leaves. Max led the way, nose low, tail stiff, following an invisible path only instinct could trace. The silhouette of the old church emerged again through the mist, a relic of stone and ice, half buried but defiant against time. Frost hung like glass on its broken windows, and the bell tower leaned as though bowing under invisible weight. Emma's breath misted before her as she approached. Her mind spun with fragments of the letter she had found, the haunting confession, the mention of a vault beneath the church. Curiosity gnawed at her reason, but so did something deeper, a sense that fate had guided her here to uncover the truth that others had tried to erase. She tightened her scarf around her neck and pushed open the warped door. Inside, the air felt heavier than before, as if the church itself knew it was being disturbed. Max sniffed along the floor, pausing at the altar. His paws scratched against a section of wood that sounded hollow. Emma crouched beside him, brushing away the frost with her gloved hand. "Good boy," she murmured. Beneath the altar, almost hidden behind a layer of cracked stone, was an iron hatch sealed by a rusted lock. It bore faint markings, numbers, and letters, nearly worn away by time. Emma exhaled excitement, flickering through her exhaustion. "There you are." Using a crowbar she had found near the entrance, she pried at the lock until it gave with a sharp metallic snap. The hatch groaned open, releasing a rush of cold, stale air that smelled faintly of metal and dust. A dark staircase spiraled downward. She hesitated, then turned on her flashlight, the beam cutting through the black. "Stay close, Max," she whispered. They descended slowly. The deeper they went, the colder it grew. The stone walls were lined with frost, and the sound of dripping water echoed faintly. At the bottom lay a small chamber carved directly into bedrock. Dozens of wooden crates stood stacked against the walls, each marked with stenciled codes: U.S. property, 1953, and hazardous materials. Nearby, a metal cabinet had been torn open, its papers scattered across the floor, maps, ledgers, and sealed envelopes bearing the faded seal of the Department of Energy. Emma crouched, brushing the dust from one of the documents. Her heart skipped when she read the heading, Project Prometheus, Hope Creek Site, Uranium Containment. She blinked, the words sinking in. This wasn't just a mining town, she whispered. They were experimenting. She began snapping photos with her phone, the weak battery indicator blinking red. She flipped through another folder, list of names, dates, and health records. Every file ended abruptly on June 18, 1953, the same date from the letter. Max's growl broke the silence. He stood rigid, facing the staircase, ears erect. Emma froze. Footsteps echoed above, slow, deliberate crunching against the wood. Her heart hammered. She turned off the flashlight and held her breath. For a long moment there was only silence. Then a voice, hoarse but steady, called down. "You shouldn't be here." Emma's pulse spiked. "Who's there?" she called back, her hand instinctively resting on her belly. The steps descended, and out of the dim light came an older man. He was tall and wiry, dressed in a heavy canvas coat frayed at the edges, his boots caked with snow. His face was lean, weathered, and creased like old leather, with a gray beard trimmed short. His eyes, sharp and pale blue, watched her with a mix of suspicion and sorrow. "My name's Jack," he said finally, his voice gravelly, shaped by years of mountain wind and silence. "Jack Thornton. I used to live here long before they called it a disaster zone." Emma lowered her flashlight, slightly studying him. "You're from Hope Creek." "I was," he replied, his tone bitter. "Before the government decided this place was better off buried." He glanced around the vault, his jaw tightening. "You found what you came for. Now you need to leave." Emma shook her head. "I can't. I found evidence, records of experiments. People deserve to know what happened here." Jack stepped closer, his shadow long against the wall. "You think you're the first to try? Others came, reporters, researchers, treasure hunters. None of them stayed long. The mountain has a way of keeping its secrets." She met his gaze, unflinching. "Then why are you still here?" Something flickered in his expression, guilt, maybe grief. He hesitated before answering. "Because someone has to remember." He turned away, his hand brushing the cold stone wall. "They said it was an accident, but I saw the trucks come at night, the men in suits with Geiger counters. They sealed off the mines, paid the families to disappear. The money was supposed to buy silence, but it didn't buy forgiveness." Emma felt a chill run through her, not from the air but from his words. That's what the letter meant, she whispered. The vault holds blood money. Jack nodded slowly. And radiation. The uranium's still here, buried deep. You stay too long, you'll be poisoned, same as the rest. She swallowed hard. If you knew, why didn't you tell anyone? I tried, he said, his voice low. But by then nobody wanted the truth. They wanted peace. A low rumble vibrated through the ground, faint but distinct. Jack's head snapped up. That's not thunder, he muttered. You stirred something. He grabbed her arm, firm but not rough. We need to go. Now. Emma stumbled as they climbed the stairs, Max at her heels, barking once sharp and urgent. Behind them, a metallic creak echoed through the vault, followed by the faint sound of falling debris. When they burst through the hatch, daylight hit like a flood. The wind had picked up again, the sky bruised with clouds. Emma leaned against the altar, gasping for air. Jack stood beside her, his breath visible in short bursts. He looked at her, eyes weary but resolute. If you're staying, you'd better understand Hope Creek doesn't forgive trespassers. It remembers. Emma met his gaze, determination hardening in hers. Then it remembers us now. The sky had turned to steel by midday, and the mountain groaned beneath the weight of gathering snow. Emma followed Jack through the narrow trail behind the church, her breath shallow, her legs trembling under the strain of both exhaustion and the weight of her unborn child. Max trotted beside her ears, flicking his nose, twitching at every gust of wind. The storm was coming again, heavier than before. How much farther, Emma asked, her voice hoarse. Jack glanced back over his shoulder. His gray beard was crusted with frost, and his pale eyes looked almost colorless against the whiteness of the world. 1/2 mile, he said. There's an old storage shaft used to keep the mine records. If the vault below the church was the cover, this one's where the truth sleeps. When they reached the entrance, it was almost invisible, just a slab of rock carved into the mountain, sealed with rusted iron doors. Jack forced them open with a crowbar, the hinges screaming like an animal in pain. The air that poured out was dry and bitterly cold. Inside the tunnel descended sharply walls lined with frost-coated pipes and flickering light bulbs that somehow still clung to life through the decades. Emma steadied herself on the rough wall, Max pressing close to her legs as they descended. The beam of Jack's flashlight danced ahead, cutting through darkness that felt alive. At the end of the corridor lay a wide chamber. What Emma first took for stone pillars were stacks of steel lockers, each labeled with serial numbers and the faded seal of the Department of Energy. In the center, a vault door stood ajar, its lock mechanism shattered as if blown open years ago. Beyond it lay rows of wooden crates identical to those in the church basement, but these were filled not with files or instruments, but bundles of cash, each stamped Federal Compensation Disbursement, 1953. Emma froze. Oh my God, she whispered, it's real. Jack didn't look surprised. Money for silence, he muttered. Every dollar meant for a family that never got it. The kind of guilt they thought they could bury. Emma pulls out her phone and fumbled for service, her fingers numb. The screen showed a single flickering bar, then nothing. We need to tell someone, she said. The press, the police, anyone. Jack's expression darkened. You think they'll let you walk away with that Awas knowledge? He pointed to the ceiling. They still monitor this place. I've seen the drones. You tripped something when you opened that first vault. Before Emma could reply, Max's growl shattered the stillness. He stood rigid, staring toward the tunnel they'd entered. A faint metallic sound echoed a clatter of boots on stone. Jack's face hardened. They found us. He doused his flashlight and motioned for silence. Emma's heart hammered in her chest. The light from the entrance flickered, replaced by faint beams of white flashlights. Voices followed, low and controlled, professional. Men, at least 3. Jack crouched beside her, his breath visible in the dim light. There's a maintenance tunnel, he whispered. It leads to the old silver mine, half collapsed, but still open enough for a crawl. You take it, follow Max. Don't stop for anything. Emma shook her head. You're coming with us. Jack's eyes softened, the first time she'd seen warmth in them. I've lived my whole life running from ghosts. Maybe it's time I face them. Gunfire cracked sharp, deafening. A bullet sparked against the metal doorframe inches above them. Emma flinched, covering her belly instinctively. Jack shoved her toward the back wall, pulling aside a rusted grate. Go! He barked. Max lunged forward, barking furiously as if daring the intruders to come closer. Emma hesitated only a second before crawling into the dark, Max squeezing in behind her. The tunnel was barely wide enough to move the air thick with dust and the echo of distant gunfire. Behind them, she heard Jack's final shout, defiant and echoing, then silence. The tunnel twisted for what felt like forever. Emma's knees scraped against stone, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The contractions began suddenly, sharp, deep, unstoppable. Panic gripped her chest. "No, not now," she whispered, biting back a cry. Max turned, whining softly, licking her hand as if urging her on. She crawled a few more feet before the tunnel opened into a wider chamber, an abandoned silver storage room, its walls glimmering faintly under the weak glow of her dying flashlight. She collapsed against a crate, clutching her belly. Another contraction tore through her, and she screamed, her voice bouncing off the metal walls. Max barked, pacing in circles, torn between panic and vigilance. "It's okay," she gasped. "We'll be okay." Her body took over instinct, stronger than fear. Time blurred, minutes, or hours she couldn't tell. The storm howled above, wind seeping through cracks in the stone. Then suddenly there was silence and the first cry of life. A baby's cry. Weak, fragile, but real. Emma wept, cradling the tiny, trembling form against her chest. "You made it," she whispered, voice breaking. The baby's skin was flushed, her small fists clenched tight. Emma wrapped her in her scarf, holding her close for warmth. Max lay beside them, his body forming a protective curve, his fur brushing the baby's blanket. His eyes flicked toward the tunnel, alert, but calm now, as if he understood his watch had only just begun. Outside, the storm raged on, covering Hope Creek in another layer of snow and silence. Deep in the mountain, Emma Collins, alone, but not defeated, rocked her newborn daughter in her arms. In the distance, lightning flashed across the valley, illuminating the peaks for a heartbeat. And in that moment, she could almost see Jack's silhouette standing at the entrance of the mine, proud and still guarding the truth he had given his life to protect. When dawn came, the storm finally broke. The sky above Hope Creek stretched pale and bruised, heavy clouds drifting away like exhausted ghosts. Snow blanketed the mountains in silence, soft and shimmering, as if the night's chaos had been only a bad dream. Inside the silver mine, Emma awoke to the faint cry of her newborn daughter. Her body ached from exhaustion, but the sound of that fragile voice filled the air with life. She looked down at the baby bundled in her scarf, tiny pink-skinned eyes still shut, and felt tears rise hot and uncontrollable. Beside her, Max lifted his head, yawning softly before pressing his nose against the baby's blanket, as though confirming she was real. "We did it." "Max," Emma whispered hoarsely, "we made it." Outside, a strange rhythmic hum echoed faintly through the air, the whir of engines. Emma blinked in disbelief, crawling toward the crack of light that filtered through the collapsed rocks. Beyond it, a red drone light flashed, scanning the snow. She remembered Jack's last act, the metallic box he had smashed before she escaped the emergency beacon. He had triggered it. Her heart swelled with a pain that wasn't just grief, but gratitude. "You old fool," she murmured softly, smiling through tears. Hours later, when the rescue team broke through the blocked tunnel, the light was blinding. A man's voice shouted, "We found her!" Strong hands reached in, wrapping her and the baby in heavy blankets. Max barked once, tail thumping weakly, as two rescuers helped them climb out. The team's leader, Sheriff Alan Reeves, stepped forward. He was a tall man in his 50s, with a square jaw, dusted in gray stubble snow, clinging to the edges of his thick parka. His eyes, a steady hazel, held both suspicion and kindness, the kind that comes from years of seeing both the best and worst of people. "You're Emma Collins," he asked, his voice deep, calm, but edged with a concern. Emma nodded weakly. "And this is, She smiled faintly, holding the baby tighter. "Her name's Lydia." Sheriff Reeves motioned to his deputy to fetch the medic. "We'll get you both to warmth." But as he turned, Emma reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small metal key, the one from the first vault, along with the folded letter and a bundle of files tied in old string. "Before you do," she said, her voice trembling, "you need to see this." Reeves frowned, taking the papers. His gloved fingers brushed the faded stamp U.S. Department of Energy Project Prometheus. His eyes flicked up. "Where did you find this?" Emma's answer came like a whisper carried by wind. "In the dark, where truth was buried." Back at the rescue station, heat and light returned to her world. The crackle of the wood stove, the scent of antiseptic, the softness of clean blankets all felt surreal after so much cold. Reeves sat across from her, reading through the documents. His brow furrowed with every page, the color draining slightly from his face. When he finally spoke, his tone was careful. If this is real, it changes everything. But you understand this will bring attention. Reporters, government suits, all of it. Emma nodded. I don't want attention. I want the truth to help someone. She looked down at her sleeping daughter. Use whatever's left of that money to build something good. A medical fund, maybe for the children who never got their chance. Reeves studied her for a long moment, then slowly nodded. You've got more courage than most people I know. His gaze softened. And that dog of yours, he's a damn hero. Max, who was lying by the fire, perked up his ears, as if understanding, then laid his head back down with a sigh. 3 months passed. Winter melted into spring, and Hope Creek, once a forgotten scar on the map, stirred again. Journalists filled the town square, their cameras flashing against thawing snow. News headlines spread across the country. Pregnant woman uncovers $200 million, hidden vault in abandoned mining town. But beyond the noise, deeper stories emerged of families long gone, of names once erased from record books of the government inquiry now opened in Washington. Emma, now settled in a modest cabin at the edge of the valley, watched it all unfold from a distance. Her daughter, Lydia Hope Collins, slept peacefully in a wooden cradle by the window. Emma had chosen her middle name as a tribute not just to the town, but to the man who saved her life and gave his own to redeem it. Sometimes at dusk, she would see a shape in the distance, an old man's figure, half shadow, half memory, and she would whisper a quiet thank you into the wind. Max, now with flecks of white on his muzzle, stayed ever close. Each night he curled beside Lydia's crib, one ear always perked, guarding her with the same devotion that had carried them through the snowstorm. Emma often sat awake by the fire watching them, her mind drifting to that night in the mine, the echo of Jack's voice, the cry of new life, and the storm that gave way to silence. One morning, as the first green shoots broke through the melting snow, a small crowd gathered in Hope Creek. Sheriff Reeves stood before the old church, now restored, unveiling a new plaque in memory of the lost of 1953, in honor of those who brought the truth to light. Emma stood at the back, Lydia in her arms, Max at her side. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The cold mountain wind that swept through the valley felt softer now, carrying not secrets, but forgiveness. That night, as snow began to fall again, Emma whispered to her daughter, "Some miracles are born not from faith, but from courage." Lydia stirred in her sleep, and outside Max lifted his head, gazing at the sky, where the snowflakes glimmered like falling stars, a silent promise that Hope Creek's ghosts had finally found peace. Sometimes miracles don't arrive with thunder or angels. They come quietly in the cry of a newborn, in the loyalty of a dog that never leaves, or in the courage of a soul who chooses faith when the world gives them every reason not to. Emma's story reminds us that even when life buries us beneath storms, God never forgets where he planted hope. The snow that once covered a town's signs became the same blanket that sheltered new life, proof that his grace can turn tragedy into redemption. In our daily lives, we all face our own winter's times when everything feels cold, lost, and broken. But just as Emma found light in the darkness, we too can find God's hand in the smallest acts of love, in forgiveness, and in the strength to keep going when it hurts the most. Because faith is not about seeing the path clearly, it's about walking it anyway, trusting that every step leads us closer to warmth, to peace, to purpose. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it. Leave a comment with your thoughts or prayers and let others know they're not alone in their storms. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of faith, hope, and miracles that still happen even in the quietest corners of this world. May God bless you, guide you through your darkest nights, and remind you, as he reminded Emma, that no winter lasts forever and every snow hides a seed of grace waiting to bloom.